Ryan's the CTO and co-founder of Formidable Labs in Seattle, but he has a secret dark past. In a previous life, he was a patent lawyer. In an ongoing effort to atone for that, he is giving awesome talks like the one he's going to give today, which is on testing. So everyone give a hand to Ryan.
All right. Hi, I'm Ryan. I'd like to talk with us today about making the JavaScript tests fast, easy, and friendly. So JavaScript in the modern world is cool. We can do things like hook it into our array, hook it into practically anything today. Put a database on it, pass it around the audience. On the kind of more professional side of things, our applications are getting larger and more complex. There's no real option for no script anymore. JavaScript's not optional. What we have is we're building tons of logic on the front end, and you know what? It's cool. Our developer community is growing. Witness CascadiaJS. The technology ecosystem is exploding. Witness NPM. Yay! So it's great. But the thing I want to talk about today is it good JavaScript? What we do is critical, and that's cool because we're important. We can all be fully employed and know that. But at the same time, if what we do breaks, it's now more than ever going to be a bad, bad thing. So what I want to talk about is the ways in which the JavaScript can be more robust and reliable, and specifically testing. One of the canonical things that we think about when we want to say, do we have good code, is that we test it. And this is kind of old school, and we all kind of know this. You can find bugs early. You can build confidence in your code. And at a fundamental level, we can do what we do, change things, and hope to not break the world every time we merge a pull request. But that's in theory. We know we should test. But in practice, things are a little bit rougher. Sometimes the tests are rough, sometimes it's hard, and in fact, sometimes just the process of doing the test makes us want to sit down and cry. So I'm going to offer just a kind of simple observation here, is that when you're thinking about testing, don't worry so much about the technology and processes, because if in the first place developers won't write or won't run the test, then what we're doing really doesn't matter. And my contention here is that developers will avoid tests that are difficult to write, that are slow to run, or that are unfriendly or just kind of make you hate the whole process. But testing can be something that you find does wonderful things for your development project, for your organization, when they're easy, when they're fast, and when they're friendly. So I work at Formidable Labs. We're a full stack JavaScript software consultancy, and we also do training. So I've worked with small teams, I've worked with very large teams, and I've seen kind of some of the hurdles that it takes when getting into the tests. And I want to change that because I am a test geek. I love testing, and in particular, in the last 5 years, particularly on the client side, it has gotten way easier, way better, and just a lot more fun to do our testing. In fact, so much so that I plunked down several months of all of my extracurricular time, even writing a book on the subject. So I like this, and I want to kind of bring that love out to the rest of everyone here. So today what we're going to talk about, to focus us down to something that's a little more digestible, is front-end unit tests, those running in the browser. I'm picking those in particular because, well, I deal with those a lot. 2, they tend to be some of the hardest, wonkiest tests. These are the ones that'll trip you up in many different ways. And 3rd, I get to do cool in-browser examples for y'all today. But at the same time, what I'm talking about, and hopefully some of the tips I'll share with you, should apply to your back-end tests, your integration tests, and even your tests outside of the JavaScript language. At the same time, what we're not going to talk about today is wiring up the stack. I love that. Talk to me after, and I have lots of hopefully good suggestions on that. We're not going to debate stacks. I'm not going to get into whether Mocha is better than Jasmine. I will mention technologies, but I don't really care what you choose. And finally, I'm not going to talk about how to substantively write the tests. There are very good books on the subject, again, for another day. Very important, but not right now. What I want to talk about is simply this. How do we make the developers actually write, actually run, and maybe, just maybe, love the tests? First thing we can do is we should have tools and processes that can make the tests easy to learn, to write, and to run. This is particularly important for new developers who don't have test experience or just developers who are new to your project and don't know quite how the tests run in your project. So let's talk about why testing can be hard. One is, if you're on the client side, there's browser idiosyncrasies. Hello, IE. Yes, we have to test across all of these things, and the differences between our browser means that testing is even harder. In JavaScript, at the language level, we have events, we have timing, we have asynchronous I/O. We have a lot of non-determinism that makes writing serial tests often challenging. And finally, although we have these great test tools, things that are enormously powerful, we have good concepts like doing data fixtures, DOM fixtures, it's kind of hard to just dive into. So the first thing I'm going to say, when you think about how do I approach testing, say for my new project, is build an infrastructure that runs the test, and build it for everyone so that new folks can jump in and just kind of get started. So the first thing is, it should be in place from the start, or as soon as possible, because the later you wait to retrofit test, I can tell you, bolting on test 6 months into the project is so painful, and while if you do it up front, you'll take a little pain hit then, but things get much better over time. Second, integrate and automate. So if you have a test infrastructure built up, something that can run the test from the command line, hook it into everything else. We've got so many cool integrations. GitHub can automatically tell you if the pull requests are going to break things. Slack on your communication channel or IRC can start blowing up with messages from your bot saying things are going wrong. And there's lots of great hosted services that take a lot of the nuts and bolts of hooking everything together, do it for you. And finally, you need to choose good tools. So when I'm going to talk about testing tools, what I'm looking at is what enables me to have good organization and flexibility for the developers. The three things I really look for here is good reporting. I need a test framework that will give me a good, actionable report of things going on. And what I'm looking most importantly at is how does it deal with failures? Because your test passing is actually your easy case. You want information when things are going wrong so that you can fix them and find if your application has bugs. Second of all, it's JavaScript. You need first-class asynchronous support. Now, most of the things I'll talk about today do have asynchronous support, but if your test stack doesn't have that, you're going to be in for a world of pain. JavaScript's asynchronous, just get with the program. And finally, you need to have good assertions. Ideally, things that read naturally, that aren't just something equal or throw new error if, something that you can look at an assertion of some condition somebody's testing and see, oh, that's what it's saying. And finally, I'll just throw as a one-off thing, when you're choosing your tool set, if you're doing full-stack development with Node.js backend, JavaScript frontend, do yourself a favor. Use the same test stack. Everything I'm going to talk about today works just as well on the client as on the browser. Okay, that was a lot of talk. The too long didn't read version of this, if you just want to take away something, is use Mocha, Chai, and Sign-on.js. These are clickable links. I'll send around the slides. Or use Jasmine and you're done. So let's just see a little bit about what I'm talking in some small aspects of what I think and what I can offer is a good infrastructure. This is a very small test. Okay, I've got a test suite. I'm using Mocha, so the describe statement tells me that's a suite. I'm going to describe my tests around CascadiaJS. On lines 2 and lines 8, I have the it statement. That is an actual test. So I'm going to say Cascadia is awesome. And I'm going to also say that my test will fail without the love. Lines 3 and lines 9 are expect statements from Chai, and that's my assertions. And what I like about Chai is I get to read this like natural English. So in lines 3 to 5, I'm going to say I expect CascadiaJS to include JS. I mean, it really should. And to not equal dull. That's almost the English version of what I'm trying to say here. And also on line 9, I'm going to expect that the tests contain love, because they really should. So let's see this in action when I run my test. Uh-oh. We just had a test failure here. But let's look into what we have. So first of all, of my two tests, CascadiaJS is indeed awesome. But like I said, we want to look at what the failures are and see if that's something actionable for us. And here's why I'm going to say Mocha and Chai together provide actionable information. The fails without love test did indeed fail. I get a red color and I get an X. The assertion error, and unfortunately it's pretty small, but the failure message says that it expected the test to include love. And that's actually pretty instructive to me. So given that I'm given the test talk here, I can't well leave a test suite breaking before moving on. Let's go in and I will actually declare that I love the test. Let's see if we do better. This time my test suite is passing, and I can finally move on. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is talk about lowering the barriers to entry as something that can make the test easy. And what I'm going to talk about this is make no assumptions. If you have a test suite, it might be the coolest thing since sliced bread. But if new devs coming into it need to know something they don't already, you really should take care of that. And second of all, is you need to go even further than that. And what I'll say is provide test skeletons. If you're a new dev coming to the project, it is insufficient for you to just have the test infrastructure in place, go write the test. What I'm going to say is you need hello worlds that are digestible, you can plug in, give a new developer just a file to start with that can just run hello world so that they can extend that and see how all the parts play. As an extension to that, sometimes even that's not enough, and I just say get out and push. What I mean by that is beyond a test skeleton, have an actual mentor, a senior developer, help your junior devs with their initial integration with the test to make it a pleasant experience. Now that takes time, but I'm going to say that this is another way of saying initial investments of time can make testing more tractable and more reasonable to go over the life of a project. Third, write it down, and that kind of dovetails with the previous point. The devs should be able to get up to speed just based on the docs. So I mean, write down the test stack you've got, your conventions, your best practices and guides, and anything you learn as you learn it. So if you are coming across anti-patterns, do yourself a favor, write it down, because as your project gets bigger, you want to have this living document that somebody can go to and say, this is what we're doing wrong. Or in a pull request, you point back to the doc and say, this is what we need to watch out for. Finally, the last thing that I'll talk about to making things easier is please do have an onboarding process and training specifically for the test. Now, it doesn't need to be heavyweight. It can be a checklist of go read these things, talk to this one person about your first test, and then assign a pull request that includes a test. It doesn't have to be like a week-long training or something. But what it should be is just have some notion that tests are hard. You need to have some kind of gentle introduction. Promote and expect mentorship. And finally, baby steps. Give small chunks of work that are real work to your developers as they come on board to let them just exercise the parts and see how they can get the test to actually write them and to run them. And then those 4 things will get you a little bit towards making the tests easier. With that in mind, let's move on to the next meta topic I want to talk about, and that is making the tests fast. Because I'm going to say the tests have to be blazingly fast to run. How many of us out there hate their slow tests in their project? Me too. So when I talk about fast, what do I mean? At least for the client-side front-end, your whole suite runs in less than 30 seconds. And yes, I do mean the whole thing. While that's something of a challenge and something that I'm still working on some of our larger projects to get to that, I would say you should even aim for 5 seconds. And why I'm going to contend this is important is you want your developers running the tests as much as possible. You want to have something that can just do an automated spin loop and throw up grunt notifications when things go wrong, so that if developers touch some seemingly unrelated piece of code that breaks something else, they get instant feedback. But if they do that, they will run the tests all the time and you will discover bugs faster. It also makes writing them easier because you can get that instant feedback. So let's talk about why is testing slow in JavaScript. The main things we're going to see is network. Your back-end server doing HTTP or data store requests, your front-end code doing AJAX requests. There's timers, set timeouts, and explicit waits you will put in your code. And finally, on the front end, UI effects like a slow fade. So I'm going to give us 4 tips of how to speed up and just like make blazingly fast our tests. One is know what to look for when you're saying, okay, they're slow, let's do something about it. I'm going to say ignore your pure JavaScript code execution. For all of you computer science degree folks out there, I don't care if you've got an O of n squared loop, an O of n cubed loop. For most of the common scenarios we have, if you're in pure JavaScript and not waiting on async I/O, ignore it for the tests. What you should focus it on is network communication, because that is out of the box order of magnitude slower. Want to ferret that out. And second of all, explicit waits in code, like a set timeout. Set timeouts will crush your test speed. So with that in mind, we know what to look for. Let's go find the type of things that are wrong. Again, this comes back to you need a good test reporter to find your slow poke tests. And in particular, you want your reporter to give you test timing results that mean something, that are actionable, and that ideally are programmatically useful to hook into something else. Let's look at an example. This is, again, a set of Mocha tests where I have one that is fast, one that is sort of slow. I wait 51 milliseconds, even slower, 300 milliseconds, and finally super slow at 2001 milliseconds. I'm going to run these. So when we pop them up and I run my tests, what we see is I get 3 test passes, 1 test failure. The isFast test has no annotation. It's pretty small there, but there's nothing but white after isFast. That means you're good to go. The Mocha test reporter is great because it has configurable thresholds that I'm going with here. At 51 milliseconds, the sort of slow gets orange, kind of a warning annotation. This one's kind of doing something wrong. That is really slow hits the dreaded red, and that means that is something you need to ferret out. 300 milliseconds right now is not a big deal, but in our largest project, we've got a team of some 50 JavaScript developers for a client that we're helping. We have over 3,000 client-side tests right now, and I can tell you, 300 times 3,000 will really start to add up. And finally, and I love this thing, Mocha will actually time out at some threshold so that you have not only actionable information, you will stop until you resolve this. The test speed in this case, for the last one that's called times out, is so important, we will not allow the test to proceed without you fixing whatever the speed issue you have there. So, what can we do to fix this? I'm going to say the best and easiest technique that you should look to is test fakes. And that says, network slow, waiting for timing slow, so let's just pretend it works fast and do that instead. So we look to fake out things like our XHR requests or our backend server communication, as well as our timers. And I am just going to throw out one library that I love, signon.js. And what it does is it goes into your JS environment and patches the internals so that AJAX communication works differently, so that set timeout works differently, and in ways that you can co-opt, give canned responses, and have it go suddenly, the things that were slow are blazingly fast. Another way of how I like to think of what you should fake is, your test suite should run just fine when you are on an airplane and that there is no internet. So let's look at an example. This test is faked and fast. What I have in lines 3 to 6 is I have just basically a simple set timeout. Set to timeout after 5 minutes. Now let's ignore that Mocha would kill that test anyways and say it would let it run. That single test would make it so that no developer, I guarantee you, will ever run your test. But let's say it's critical that we have some set timeout and that we actually need to test it. What do? Well, sign-on here provides a very elegant answer. In line 2, I say signon.use fake timers. From this point forward, magically, time works different in JavaScript. Nothing happens, but in line 9, I say clock.tick, the sign-on construct I have, simulate that suddenly 5 minutes and 1 millisecond have passed. Now when I run my test, it happens instantly. And what we can see is I just took something that was unbearably slow, and with a little bit of hackery and messing around with the black magic internals of JavaScript, I have a blazingly fast test. And this type of technique can apply to almost all facets of your code to speed it up. Finally, this is in case you aren't quite there with blazingly fast for all of your tests, that's okay. Just offer shortcuts to your developers. Basically just think as what is fast enough for them to run the test, and then enable them to run subsets of the test. Say if you run in tons of browsers, just give them the fastest one in their normal development path, and then leave the everything test for your continuous integration. So now we've talked about what we can do to make the test easy. New developers can come into them, to make them fast so that senior all the way to your junior developers will actually run them. The last thing I want to talk is about culture of supporting and embracing new developers and supporting the test as a general concept. Why is testing daunting? Why do developers so often hate it or situationally hate doing some of the tests? I mean, one thing is we have a variety of backgrounds and experience. On one of our largest client projects, we've got folks who are Java developers moving over to JavaScript. Yay, you're coming to our side. We have JavaScript developers who have never written a test before. And so it's just, you feel a little bit kind of daunting getting into those scenarios. Second, let's admit that a lot of our testing tools, while powerful, just have a very tough learning curve to get into. And finally, and most importantly, you'll have organizational obstacles. And what I'm usually talking about is the top. The managers, the product owners, your C-level folks want features, and they want to see features released. Like, that's what you talk about on your Jira boards. And getting testing up in there with priority, with allocated time, is often very hard. So number one, what I'm going to say is find champions, because people who know how to do the tests, or that will learn how to do the tests, and be somebody who their role is basically being an ambassador. They are there to make the tests more friendly to other folks, and that you have like a group of these people who you can spread responsibility and fan out, so that there are people who will step up and say, you've got a test problem, don't just sit there and suffer, I can help with that. Second of all, and the bigger point here, is that you're going to have to win the higher-ups over, or else it's just going to be unfriendly to write the test. So for most of us out here, that means educating your bosses. And the best tip I can give you here is that think in terms of a project manager. They want to release features, they're concerned with time, and they're concerned with cost. So if you like the test, if you want them to continue, and you want them to not give you flack about writing them, think about it this way. If you find a bug while you are developing your code, before you commit it, or even if you've got a pull request open, before you merge it to master, it is super easy to fix it. You push another commit, you're done. Nobody even knew there was a bug. That's cheap. If you somehow get a bug that's merged into master, goes out to QA or staging, the QA team's kicking the tires with it, and they find a bug, that's good, but it's more expensive now. QA team wasted cycles on that. You have to go back, you have to fix it, you have to do another pull request, get it out to QA again. That costs more developer time, and it involves more people. It costs actually more money to your project. Finally, if that bug makes it all the way out to production, and you find it there, that can actually cost real revenue. You have this awkward thing of, do we actually shut down the service because there's a bug out there? Or at minimum, we now have to take it all the way back to dev, create a fix, QA it, and get out. That is real money and real developer time. And those type of things, those type of stories will resonate with your managers. So what I'd recommend is my tip of track the bugs that you have avoided by writing the tests. So I review a lot of code and kind of help folks out. And a lot of times what happens is I'll get a pull request. I'll say generally, hey, that looks great. But you know, this one aspect could use a bit of test coverage. Then when I get a couple emails later, what I see is, hey, added the test. Oh, by the way, I also found a bug, so I added the fix right now. That is a clear win that you can say, this is saving us time and money if you are ever asked. And I write those things down. You can put it in a spreadsheet, heck, even on a piece of paper. And finally, also do the same thing to identify regression tests. Because if you have a bug, and in the process of fixing the bug, you should write the test that would have found the bug, you can point to those and say, those are all of the things if we'd had it in the first place would have saved us some money. So that's my kind of tips for sending things up the pipeline. If you are at the top of the pipeline and are one of these higher-ups, I simply implore you to this: support the test. And that means allocate actual developer time and say, we will give you time to do the test that you see fit. Now, it's fine to ask for process, for priority, and for the goals, to challenge the developers and say, do you really need this? What is this helping? And they should have answers to that. But please, please, if you are higher up, don't make your developers re-justify the mere fact of having the tests or writing them in the first place. And with these two things, we can finally look to making the process of writing tests just a little bit friendlier. So bringing it all together here is that your test setup and your infrastructure should make it easy for folks to jump in, or else they won't write the test. Your test should be blazingly fast, or else the folks won't run the test. And finally, to avoid everyone hating it or just feeling all kinds of wrong pressure, everyone should contribute to making the process of running and writing the test as friendly and supported as possible. So I'm going to say out there, go forth and test. These are just some of the kind of tips and techniques that I've picked up over time. There's a lot of other things you can do to just make the tests, as at the meta level, a better and more fun thing. So from here, I'd say, read the documents. There's a lot of great literature, books, internet resources out there. Try things out. Beyond what I've talked about, there are amazingly cool test technologies that might be even more appropriate for you do. And finally, ask for help. You can pay for help, like Formidable Labs. We help people do this all the time, but you don't even have to pay for it. The open source testing community is just great and responsive to you. And beyond that, I'd say, look around here at Cascadia. I think I even saw a guy that was wearing a shirt that said, test all the things. There are folks out there that have shared experiences, have hit the same stumbling blocks as you, and just reaching out can make you feel a little bit more confident and comfortable in going forward with a bigger test goal for your organization. And so with that, hopefully I've given you just a couple of tips today so that you can go back home to your project and make your tests perhaps a little bit faster, easier, and friendlier. And with that, I'll say, thanks a lot.